I think everyone in this House would agree that it is important to have people providing corporate insolvency services who can be trusted. We have provisions, we have legislation to ensure that people providing other important services such as legal services, such as accountancy services, and around financial services, that has a body of legislation underpinning it. So is it with those who provide insolvency services, and ensuring that we have measures in place to not be acting as the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff and trying to patch up a situation that's gone bad, but actually having some preventative measures in place to ensure that people of good character and with the appropriate skills are actually providing these services, and that there are regulations and rules in place to ensure that that happens. That's what this legislation is about. And it's critical legislation, and one of the reasons it's critical legislation is because there are so many insolvencies happening in this country, and I think that's another point that's worth noting as context to this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, because the supposed wonderful economic environment in which we're operating is actually exposed as somewhat of a fallacy when you look at that the number of insolvencies in New Zealand since 2008 has actually increased dramatically under this government, and so therefore having a piece of legislation in place to ensure that we've got an appropriate insolvency regime is even more critical. Before I get into the substance of this bill and actually what changed in the Select Committee, it is important to note that how long it's taken for this piece of legislation to get to this point in the House, and is another example of important legislation, particularly in the commerce area, which has been languishing on our books for far too long. This bill was first introduced on the 27th of April in 2010. Its first reading was the 24th of August in 2010. The Select Committee reported back after doing very good work. The Select Committee reported back on the 9th of May 2011, but its second reading was first started, Mr. Speaker, on the 26th of September 2013, and today it's, what is it? 7th of November, and we're back into the second reading. Now that's 3 years, and that's an extraordinary amount of time for a piece of legislation like this, particularly, as I said, in that environment where there have been so many insolvencies, for this piece of legislation to come back to the House. And our view is that this is just one of many bills which haven't made it through all of their readings in the House in this commerce area, particularly bills around consumer legislation, of which this is another one. This fits in with the stable of consumer protection legislation laws that are just not being taken seriously enough by this government. And I do want to make that point in a very serious manner, and I do hope that those on the other side of the House are paying attention to that. Mr. Speaker, the other point that needs to be made is that the bill which was originally introduced, the bill that's come back to this House is quite different to the bill that was actually originally introduced, and there are some very good reasons for that, and it's important just to actually outline what the reasons were, because the bill, when it was originally introduced, proposed a negative licensing regime for insolvency practitioners. That's sort of essentially a blacklist. So if you were a dodgy insolvency practitioner, never you, Mr. Speaker. That was a sort of a much wider sort of concept of the wound. Well, no, I wouldn't like to cast aspersions on anyone in this House, and certainly not you, Mr. Speaker. You know, being a person of high integrity and all that. But hypothetically speaking, hypothetically speaking, if there did happen to be a dodgy practitioner in the area of insolvency, then this bill would have created what's called a negative licensing regime for liquidators, receivers and voluntary administrators who did not meet the required standard of competence. And they then would have been banned or placed under supervision. Now, that sounds like a sensible set of measures, and that would have empowered the Registrar of Companies to maintain a publicly accessible electronic register of people who have been banned or placed under supervision. Now, on the face of it, that seemed like the sensible approach to take. But as soon as this bill got before the Select Committee, there was a range of submissions and in-depth discussion, of which both sides of that committee took part in, and there was robust discussion, and it was constructive discussion, and ultimately. That report has come back, and this is where the legislation is at, that has found that it would be much more preferable to prevent practitioners who would be, so prevent is the important word here, Mr. Speaker, just in case you're interested, prevent those practitioners who would be restricted or prohibited from providing a corporate solvency service before they undertake those insolvency duties. So they actually have to be certified as being of good character, as being having the required skills, as being appropriate to act and to provide insolvency services before they actually offer those services, instead of waiting for the damage to be done. So it's a proactive set of measures as opposed to a reactive set of measures, and that makes a lot more sense, and I think everybody pretty much agreed with that, and that's why Labor's supporting this bill. But I do want to make the point that that work, and it is important to make this point, Mr. Speaker, because a lot of the good work of this Parliament does go on in the Select Committee, and there are times when good laws get made, much better laws get made, because there is robust and constructive discussion amongst all parties, and those sorts of processes, it would be great if they were on display more to the public. And I do note that there is a trial being undertaken at the moment in our Parliament in two of our Select Committees, where the workings of that Select Committee are being webcast to the public, and I fully support that as one of the members who has advocated for that, along actually with my Green counterpart Gareth Hughes and National counterpart Nikki Kay. We advocated for there to be more public viewing of Select Committee processes, and this is one which may not seem to be a sexy kind of piece of legislation that's being negotiated, but this is one example where the public would have been able to see how some of that good work is being done in the Select Committee. So we certainly do support this legislation. We do note that it has been rewritten pretty much at the Select Committee process. We also note and criticise quite strongly the length of time that it's taken to come back to this House, and hope that it will proceed with some rapidity through its final stages. But we certainly think that it has merit and that it needs to get passed in law and needs to be put into practice.
David Clendon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to begin by echoing our Labor colleagues'